First of all, before I continue, I want to make sure we understand that Mauritania today is a modern civilization like any other place in Africa, and that when we discuss the ancient world, we're only talking about the ancient. They don't live today, for the most part, like they did back in the day, which back in the day was not tribal, because some people associate the word tribe with meaning people live in like mud huts or something. Mauritania was not like this. I mean, you can't take over Spain living in a mud hut. Well, you can, but that never happened. What we're talking about is a civilization that was up to date at the time. And we know this because, of course, we found several manuscripts from that time. In fact, there's 6 libraries in Mauritania with thousands of books that have been recovered. These are only the ones that have been recovered. Arab manuscripts, Nouakchot's walls are very, very impressive, and we do not need to even talk about how their history is tied to a greater world. But again, going back to their manuscripts,
Bien calligraphie avec la plume d'Autriche qui a été utilisée beaucoup à l'époque pour le On voit plusieurs sortes de l'encre, plusieurs couleurs. C'était préparé aussi avec plusieurs produits comme l'oxyde de
Ah, c'est de la peau de gazelle celui-là. Ah ouais.
Il est là-bas, cher, il est avec Elodie.
debates rage on with limited information and without understanding. Now, this civilization here, though it had some Berber influence, was not pure Berber. And even the Sonhaja, when they were traveling far into Spain, did not travel with pure Berbers. The Berbers had always mixed, especially in the case of wanting greater advantage over the regions they already occupied, always mixed with the local population. The Berbers were already black anyway, but they also mixed with the Niger speaking population that was in that place, creating a completely new language that was a mix between the two, which is now extinct because, of course, other languages like Arabic would take over. The Soninke languages that merged with the Berber languages of Mauritania would have been a very beautiful mix, given that these languages, in my estimation, are very similar anyway. But we know that the Soninke languages are more closely related to other Niger languages, especially those in Mali, where there's millions of speakers today of that grouping. So, given this, we know that there would have been a powerful influence by the Malians in Mauritania at the time. A lot of the cities that existed in Mauritania at the time were merely an arm of the Mali Empire. And this was true for other branches within the Mali Empire. And I've shown you specific Malian kings that are mentioned by different Arabs. And of course, we have the contacts and wars that they fought with the other side, the Kanem, Bornu, the other people, which you notice at this time, there's a lot of alliances. You know, Kanem Bornu, there's the Mali, there's Mauritania with all the other Berbers, the Sonhanga, the Almoravids, you know, the Arabs fusing with the Berbers. All of this stuff, you start to notice that there's this giant, uh, basically consolidation or bringing together of very large spaces. I keep saying Sonhanga, that's going to confuse people. Senhaja, Senhaja Berbers. And so to look at these people as truly separate, especially since we have authors, and I'm going to repeat this again because it's important that I do. We have authors at the time that said the Berbers should living in Mauritania should be put in the context of the Mali empire within all the other Negro empires. So, and we can see, obviously, I showed that video with that man holding the manuscripts, that it's not something that was kept away from the Negroes or something. It's like they wrote these things. And of course, a lot of the things that helped them develop was the fact that they were connected to the Mali Empire, which was itself connected, and those empires were connected to other empires, which were also connected. And so you have these various forms of writing that split in all these areas. I mean, you could barely pick a place in Central Africa that didn't have writing, in Equatorial Africa that didn't have writing. You can barely pick a place in North Africa that didn't have writing at the time. But of course, later on, this idea, this concept of illiteracy of Africa is pushed for obvious reasons. There are some slaves, for example, the one that I showed from Senegal, who, when they were taken to America, though a lot of slaves weren't allowed to read in America, this guy could read from jump. When they stole him, he could read. And he was from Senegal in the 1700s, where Diallo, who is the slave, was stolen. It was a very powerful place. Now, it itself also sold slaves, but it only sold war captives, which is why he was shaved when he was stolen, so that he could appear as if he was a war captain, taking away his appearance of obvious wealth around him. Now, when this happened, they took him to America. He was unfit to work out in the field, so they made him work indoors, because obviously someone who grew up soft is not going to be easy to teach. And he ran away a couple of times and he was rescued. But this Moor, which is what he was referred to at the time in the 1700s, this Moor found his way back to Africa and died with his people, got raised with people, actually died at a pretty old age after he got rescued, which is a beautiful story. But he is only one of the people at his time who could easily read. But it wasn't it, he was just a son of the history of his area, Senegal, where there was a bunch of books passing through from North Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, creating a giant Muslim network and connection with other religions as well. But the main network that was created was a Muslim network. And even if you look at the sort of smaller regions, you start to notice that those areas would have been essential in this trade. Also, I remember I wanted to read, but you could just trust me on this, that a lot of the people that were being taken, oh yeah, I did read this, the Lum Lum that were being taken to North Africa by the Arabs were not the same as these civilizations. So this idea that the Arabs or the Berbers looked down on the Negroes living in this region is not true. They only look down on savagery, which they call it savagery, but it's just living a tribal life. They only look down on that, and so they would uh, go after it harshly. The Catalan Atlas is an interesting one because it depicts for us several people who would have been in these regions of Africa. And you can see that for the most part, it's explorers and then great kings of that region. There is no real show of inhabitants. You can see here the guy in the camel. You can see the black tents written by Ibn Battuta, and then you can see Ibn Battuta on the camel, at least who we think. Then you can see Mansa Musa, and then you can see all Gao Gao You can see all of these civilizations, these buildings that would have existed at the time. That was way too fast. Let's look at it again. So you can see here in the coast, explorers from Spain, which would probably be the people who would end up be like Bartholomew Dias, who wanted to see how far Africa goes. You can also see the black tents that were mentioned by Ibn Battuta of the Mauritanians. Then you can see here Ibn Battuta himself on the black camel. At least that is who is thought. You can see dotted around are all these known settlements, but you can see they're written. They're sort of drawn in a European sense because this is a European atlas, which they had not had real experience with these regions. You can see some Arabs, you can see Nubia, but even in Nubia, you can see there's other people scattered around of Arab descent. After this, you get to Egypt, and then I continue even outside of Egypt. So this is Egypt, and then now we start getting to Yemen, and you can see here this is supposed to be the Queen of Sheba, even though they draw them European. But this is what they do. Like, even if you look at the Khans and people like that, everyone is defaultly drawn as a European. And this is supposed to be Asia, but everyone is drawn in default as a European, which is why it's laughable when you see the early version of Mansa Musa drawn as a European, and people take that to mean that Mansa Musa was a European, when you can see that they draw everyone as a European unless they know more information about the person. But this atlas, what it does is confirms what the other people were saying. But of course, there is something to be said about the fact that if they took it from Ibn Battuta, then it's still like only from the Arab perspective because they don't have the information.